I've been thinking about making this video for the past couple weeks after I saw the third episode of the new season of True Blood. It seemed as though the show is getting more and more violent in its depiction toward women, and the finale of this episode proved that to me. It depicted the main vampire, Bill, being taunted in sex with his mate, and as he was violently thrusting into her, he grabs her head and breaks her neck. Then he turns it around, like all the way around, and it faces the floor. And so he doesn't have to look at her. The camera pans down and you see her face and she's bleeding from the mouth, and she's like, "I love you, Bill Compton," while he's still pounding away. And I found this article I was reading in The Guardian called "For Your Entertainment" by Kira Cochran, and she talks about the rise of torture porn in movies like Hostel and Saw, so I want to read a few quotes from that because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Horror films have, of course, always been full of nasty, misanthropic imagery. In many other films, extreme sexualized violence against women has frequently been a theme, but recently the levels of horrific violence on show at the multiplexes and the sheer cynicism of the films involved have gone through the roof. And a lot of the most nasty, unrepentant, terrifying, pointless violence is aimed at women. Hostel is just a part of a new subgenre of horror films which are so dehumanizing, nasty, and misogynist that they are collectively known as Gorno, a conflation of gory and porno, or more commonly known as torture porn. Then she quotes Eli Roth saying, "Oh, these girls are just pieces of meat." And literally, in Hostel 2, that's exactly what they are. They are bait, they are meat, they are grist for the mill. Most of these films, both women and men, end up being sliced, gored, dismembered, decapitated. In that sense, they offer audiences equal opportunity gore. But it's the violence against women that's most troubling because it is here that sex and extreme violence collide. The publicity campaigns for many of these films flag up the prospect of watching a nubile young woman being tortured as a generally pleasurable experience. So, for instance, a U.S. Billboard campaign for our upcoming mainstream film Captivity featured the film star Elijah Colbreth, just voted the 10th sexiest woman in the world by the young male readers of FHM in a series of 4 photographs. In the first, labeled Abduction, a black gloved hand covers her mouth, and the second, Confinement, shows her with bloody fingers struggling to get out of a cage. And the third, Torture, has her face encased in an odd white mask, tubes shoved up her nose, and apparently filled with blood. And the final, under the word termination, shows her laid out and apparently dead. The billboard attracted a barrage of complaints, with Jill Soloway, one of the writers from 6 Feet Under, leading the campaign against it. The poster was soon taken down. In a piece on the Huffington Post website, Soloway wrote that the images were the most repulsive, horrifying, woman-hating, human-hating thing I've ever seen in public, and didn't just represent the horror, this was just misogyny. It was a grody combo platter of the two, the torture almost a punishment for the sexiness. It had come from such a despicable, inhuman hatred place that it somehow managed to recall Abu Ghraib, the Holocaust, porn, and snuff films all at once. Josh Whedon, the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, agreed, writing a letter to the MPAA, U.S. Ratings Board, that the ad campaign is not only a literal sign of the collapse of humanity, it's an assault. This ad is a part of the cycle of violence and misogyny that takes something away from people who have seen it. It's like being mugged. So about, I don't remember how many years, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever Black Snake Moan was out, I went with a friend and I saw it in the theater. And these two parents brought in their 3 or 4-year-old daughter, and we're sitting there watching it. And then after there was a brutal rape scene of Christina Ricci, they get up and they're walking out, and the girl's like, "Why are we leaving?" And the mom says, "This movie isn't for you." And I'm sitting there thinking, what the fuck? You couldn't tell by the poster of Christina Ricci being chained up to Samuel L. Jackson? I mean, you guys are fucking retarded. Anyway, I read this article also in The Guardian by Julie Bindel called The Truth About the Porn Industry. And I think there's a lot of overlap to regular entertainment industry and pornography today. And she writes, pornography is not benign titillation. We are now bringing up a generation of boys on cruel, violent porn, given what we know about how images affect people, this is going to have a profound influence on their sexuality, behavior, and attitudes towards women. Prevalence of porn means that men are becoming desensitized to it and are therefore seeking even harsher, more violent, and degrading images. Even the porn industry is shocked by how much violence the fans want. And reading that, it reminded me of a movie by Rob Zombie called The Devil's Rejects. And in the beginning of this movie, it shows one of the family dragging a dead naked woman by her feet through the forest, while the main character, Otis, he wakes up next to a young dead naked woman that presumably he had been having sex with either before or after her murder. I found that movie to be one of the most disgusting, just trite pieces of shit I've ever seen in my life. And Cochran continues in her article, over the years, many directors have defended violence in their films by claiming that it's ironic. But the image of a nubile woman having her innards pulled out, as occurs in Planet Terror, any less problematic because it is made in a knowing way? You could argue that it's more problematic. Irony, with its inherent insincerity, can be the emotional, deadening tool, and in terms of their content, these films are already deadening, desensitizing enough. The irony just adds another layer of soul-sucking cynicism to the mix. That's what really made me disgusted at True Blood. It just seemed that the writers are deliberately trying to make the sex scenes shocking and ironic and funny. And then they can be like, oh, that's not really violent because she's a vampire and her head will heal itself. Earlier in the episode, the same characters have an interaction that ends with Bill setting her on fire. And they show her badly burned and disfigured. There's actually a lot of scenes in this season that I find questionable, but I'm not going to get into it. There is violence, horror, and gore that tell a story, but I find that they are trying to portray it as funny and sexy and horrific. And it just turns out horrific and misogynistic. I'm sick of how movies and TV are just increasing the quotient of sex and violence. You can see it with the preteen phenomenon Twilight. How many times does the female character get hurt or nearly killed by the boys who are supposed to love her the most? And I used to watch Dexter until the last season. It opened with a naked John Lithgow in a woman's apartment. He knocks her out, and then in the next scene, they show him reviving her by cutting her leg as they both lay naked in a bathtub, and then he chokes her until she passes out. After I watched that scene, I turned it off. I'm not filling my head with these disgusting images of violence when I can just easily pick up a newspaper and read about something just as fucking horrifying. And the thing is, people think this is okay, that it's sexy and it doesn't affect people's psyches at all. It seems as though the tolerance of violence has risen with each generation. You can just look at celebrities when they get caught being violent towards the women in their lives. They instantly blame the woman for provoking the violence because it's something that she did or said or wore